All right. Hello, my name is Catherine Miller, and I'm the Director of Legal Services for Turning Point Domestic Violence Services. Today, I'm going to discuss domestic abuse against persons with disabilities and deaf people. Just a moment. Technical difficulties here. Okay, sorry about that. I think we're back on track now. So, what is Turning Point? Well, Turning Point is a domestic violence services organization that provides services and advocacy for victims of or survivors of domestic and family violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. Our mission is to work towards the prevention and elimination of domestic and dating violence. And we do this through intervention, prevention, and training and education in the community. At Turning Point, we assist all victim survivors of domestic violence, regardless of economic status, age, gender, disability, race, ethnicity. We don't exclude anyone. And many of our resources are available outside of the shelter. Going to shelter is really not appropriate for many victims. So in fact, the majority of our program participants don't utilize shelter at all. We cover 6 counties in South Central Indiana and have offices in Columbus, Seymour, Franklin, and Shelbyville. We have a shelter that is located in Columbus, but it serves all of our counties. So anyone who is needing services can come to our shelter or to one of our offices. We also have Latina advocates, so that anyone who speaks Spanish has a bilingual person that knows their culture and can help them with their any issues or help them and advocate on their behalf. So the objectives of our presentation today is to give you a greater understanding of the dynamics of domestic abuse, the unique types of abuse targeted to persons with disabilities and additional barriers to services, and how Turning Point domestic violence services can help and what kind of services we have. When discussing domestic violence, we like to use the 3 R's. So we want to recognize, understand, and identify the signs of domestic or family violence. We want to 2, respond sensitively and with concern and without judgment. And 3, we would like to refer people to domestic violence service providers. So before we discuss domestic violence and how it affects persons with disabilities, we need to define disabilities. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says that the aspects of a disability include any condition of the body or mind that makes it more difficult for the person with that condition to do certain activities and interact with the world around them. So in talking about that today, in the unique issues facing survivors with disabilities, we include any type of impairment to a person's vision, movement, thinking, remembering, learning, communicating, hearing, all the things that you can see on this slide here. So it can be person who just has mobility disability, person with sight or hearing disability, someone with cognitive disabilities. Any of those persons are covered under what we're discussing today. So now let's talk about what it looks like and how to spot sufferers. So we'll start with recognizing, understanding the dynamics of domestic abuse. So when we talk about domestic abuse, it's also termed domestic violence, and you will also hear intimate partner violence. These terms are used interchangeably. So what exactly is domestic violence? Well, as you can see from this slide, domestic violence covers a wide range of abusive behaviors, including physical, emotional, sexual, and economic abuses. These behaviors are tactics to achieve the abuser's main goal, which is power and control. So our working definition of domestic violence is here on our screen. You can see when we're talking about domestic abuse or domestic violence, it's a pattern of abusive behavior in a current or former intimate relationship. It's used by one partner to gain or maintain that power and control over the other partner. They use manipulation and fear to do this, and the use of violence and other coercive tactics are designed to gain that control over the thoughts, beliefs, and actions of that other partner. Why do we need to talk about domestic violence? Well, in general, more than 1 in 3 women and nearly 1 in 4 men in the US have experienced rape, physical violence, and/or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And unfortunately, Indiana has a higher report of this. So, women in Indiana, 40% of them report that they have had this kind of intimate partner violence in their life. While there's limited research, findings show some people with disabilities experience increased risk of domestic and sexual violence, but not all people with disabilities experience abuse at the same rates. So, of course, the risk depends on the type of impairment the person has and the type of activity limitations that they face. But we have seen through studies that women with disabilities are 2 times as likely to suffer from intimate partner violence than other populations. Men with disabilities are more likely to experience stalking and psychological aggression by an intimate partner. And one survey found that 70% of persons with disabilities have experienced some type of abuse in their life. And that could be by an intimate partner, a family member, caregiver, acquaintance, or stranger, or any combination of those. So it's really important that we are able to recognize those signs of abuse. It's also been shown that women with disabilities experience unique forms of abuse that are difficult to recognize. And they report abuse that lasts longer and is more intense than women without disabilities. When talking about the deaf community, we found that 20% of deaf adults have experienced physical intimate partner violence, and 15% have experienced forced sex from an intimate partner. This is the basic power and control wheel. And what this shows is the different tactics abusers use to gain and maintain that power and control over their partner and their relationship. These materials will all be presented. Everything presented today will be made available to anyone interested. So I'm not going to go through each one of these, but this shows you all the different tactics that are used by abusers in a very readable way. When going through the definition of domestic violence as a pattern of abusive behavior, again, we have these main categories of the tactics that abusers use to try and control their partners and to control them. And we'll talk briefly about just each one of these. So the first one is psychological abuse, and psychological or emotional violence frequently occurs in both physical and sexual violence situations. Some battered women have described the psychological abuse, particularly that ridicule, as constituting the most painful abuse they have experienced. And again, as we said before, this psychological abuse targets that person's feelings, thoughts, perceptions, and profoundly impacts their sense of self, their relationship with their partner, and their relationship to the world around them and to other people. On this screen, you can see some financial abuses. A lot of times we will see some partner maybe not allowing their partner to work or allowing them to work, but forcing them to deposit their money into the other partner's account, or just giving them a small allowance to cover basic necessities like food, and then withholding such necessities or medications or shelter as well. We also see exploiting a partner's credit. So a lot of times we'll see maybe a partner will use someone's social security number or their name and fraudulently open credit in their name, racking it up and not paying it off. So that ruins their credit. And that also hampers that survivor victim from getting out and maybe getting an apartment because their credit is so bad. Of course, what most people think of when we say domestic violence, we think of the physical violence, and that's the actually causing someone physical harm or injury. But physical violence preventing someone from using a phone, not allowing them to call for help or to call for medical assistance. That's it. Those are crimes, actually. So interference with reporting of a crime or criminal confinement are actual crimes. In addition, we see the sexual violence as well against our survivor victims, and that takes place not only as those sexual acts against someone, but also the accusations of infidelity or cheating, extreme jealousy in those relationships. We also see something called reproductive coercion. And reproductive coercion can include forcing a female partner to get pregnant, maybe multiple times, forcing a female partner to have abortions, maybe destroying condoms or not allowing birth control or other forms of contraceptive. And that can be in both same and opposite sex relationships. And then finally, we're seeing, unfortunately, more and more use of technology to abuse their partners by stalking, putting up cameras and viewing that person constantly to see what they're doing, tracking them with tracking devices, and telling people their partners who they can and can't communicate with are just some of the other types of abuses we're seeing. So in addition to the just mentioned tactics, persons with disabilities can face additional abuses from their partners. So what do some of these look like? Well, this power and control wheel is a visual representation of abuse tactics for use with persons with disability, mainly for persons with cognitive disabilities or mental health issues. And you can see it covers the same categories as the other power and control wheel we looked at, but just also gives a visual representation of that as well, a different visual representation. So some of those additional abuses that we see in persons with disabilities are neglect. So maybe their intimate partner is their only caregiver and they refuse them food or shelter, medication, or personal care. They deprive them of their physical accommodations. They destroy, hide mobility devices. They might use their victims' money improperly, such as taking or withholding their benefit checks. Also, we can see abuses as canceling medical appointments or switching doctors or refusing to take someone to their medical appointments, keeping them physically confined, or threatening or physically harming their service animals. Excuse me. So just as persons with disabilities can face additional abuses, there are abuses specific to the deaf community. And here is just another power and control wheel used for the deaf community. And in talking about the unique abuses of deaf or hard of hearing persons, we see a lot of different ways that they can use those same tactics. So intimidation, of course, can be used against any person that you're abusing. But in the deaf community, signing very close to someone's face when they're angry, or using exaggerated facial expressions and extensive stomping or pounding of objects, exaggerated signing, those kinds of things. They can exploit their small, tight-knit deaf community, and this can also have implications for confidentiality and safety issues of those survivors. Wrongly interpreting to manipulate situations. If the deaf person's partner is a hearing person, interpreting wrong information, or using hearing privilege, such as not telling people when they're not telling the abused person when people are trying to contact them, or excluding them from important phone calls or information, making decisions such as financial decisions, leaving them out of social situations with hearing persons, or not even allowing them to have access to their deaf culture or their community. So any of these things you can see can be ways that an intimate partner can abuse their deaf partner. We talked about domestic violence and the tactics abusers use. So now let's focus on the victims, survivors themselves, and why do they stay in these relationships? So it's really hard sometimes to understand why someone stays in a relationship, but you have to think about that person's perspective on it. Relationship is not always bad, right? Because why would they be in that relationship if it was bad all the time? They love that person. They want to be with that person. They want that violence to end, but not necessarily that relationship. And also, separation is a process and is often dangerous. So it's common for a victim to leave their abusive partner several times before actually finally ending that relationship. In some studies, there's been different studies, so it shows anywhere between 5 and 9 times it takes someone to leave a relationship. So this includes actually leaving a shared residence, reporting to law enforcement, filing protection orders against the abuser, going through with criminal cases, or maybe not following through with criminal cases. And any combination of these can take the survivor anywhere from 5 to 9 times. In addition, as we said, separation is dangerous. So that's one of the most dangerous times in an intimate partner violence relationship. And that's because the abuser has lost control over their partner, right? The partner has finally taken control of their life and decided to leave the relationship and leave the abuser. And so they lose control, and that often makes them, the abusive person, act more erratically, and it can lead to violence or escalated violence and even sometimes death. So, and also looking at why, the abused person stays, we have to look at the victim's priorities and perspectives. So, understanding the victim's priorities and perspectives. The first thing is access to resources. As we said before, they may have no job or no income. They may not have transportation. They might not be able to drive themselves. They may have no access to legal or other assistance, or even domestic violence services. We also see geographical and social isolation. So they may have nowhere to go or no one to help them. They may have been moved from another area or another state or city or country even, and so they have no one to assist them. And that's why they stay, or they stay so long. We also have to look at their personal relationships and circumstances. So these can be positive or negative. So relationships, maybe they have children with their abuser, and they believe that, we've heard before, some abused persons tell us that, well, he's a good father. I don't want him to lose his relationship with his kids. He or she, does their homework every night and coaches their little league or what have you, and they're a good parent. So that's why I don't want to break up the family. Or, of course, we said before, they love their partner and they want them to change, or they think they'll change, or they've been told they'll change. Also, there are norms that support certain beliefs by the abuser and the abused person. It could be religious beliefs or cultural beliefs. And those can be that the woman is supposed to keep the family together, or the man is supposed to support the family, or that, divorce is against their religion, or the man is the head and the women and the children are their property and they have to do what he says. So those are all reasons that people might stay in their relationships. We also finally have to look at the personal impact of the abuse on that survivor. So what is the emotional or psychological toll that the abuse has taken on that person? What are the physical aspects of that abuse? How is that manifested socially, behaviorally? And we will cover these a little bit more in a bit. So moving on, just as there are additional ways that abusers can mistreat their partners with disabilities, there are additional barriers that can affect whether someone with a disability leaves a relationship. So in looking at some of these additional barriers for persons with a disability, dependence on the abusers for their activities of daily living, right? Lack of support other than that caregiver. Maybe their partner is their caregiver. Maybe they have a perceived lack of credibility that people will believe what they're saying. And another one is a lack of education on domestic abuse. So persons who are being abused, even persons who don't have disabilities, oftentimes when they finally come and meet with an advocate or a case manager, and they go through that power and control wheel, they will not even have realized that some of those abuses that were happening to them were actually abuses. They think that they're just normal behavior. We also see a lack of appropriate sex education for persons with disabilities. So they may not know that what's happening to them is inappropriate or that they can say no. Difficulty in reporting due to communication issues, mobility issues, or technology barriers. Those are some reasons why people aren't able to reach out for help. And lack of skills or abilities to live independently, as well as fear of institutionalization. So additional barriers for deaf survivors can include advocates lacking in understanding of the deaf culture. So just having someone to go to talk about domestic violence and how it is for someone who's deaf. Unfamiliarity of crisis line workers with TTY or VRS. Lack of access to deaf advocates or certified deaf interpreters in not only domestic violence or sexual assault associations, but also law enforcement and also in the legal system. So we talked about those barriers and difficulties for survivors and the difficulties they might have with leaving. Now we're going to look at what we talked about, the actual effects of domestic violence on survivors. So just as abuse manifests in a variety of ways, abuser can use different tactics to abuse someone. The survivors in their life, they can experience those manifestations of the abuse in different ways. So the effects of trauma can last hours, days, weeks, months, or even years, depending on the severity of the abuse or trauma, as well as the length of time that it's happened. So when looking at the first category, that emotional or psychological manifestation or impact of domestic violence, we see the same type of impacts as other traumatic events. So the trauma that people feel or experience if they've been in a war situation, or if they've had a serious illness, if they've had a death or other losses, or if they've experienced a natural disaster. The top couple that we see on the screen, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, someone who their house was destroyed by a tornado may suffer any of those. But in addition to that, those people who have suffered intimate partner violence, domestic violence, also see that loss of self-esteem, guilt and shame, confusion and hopelessness. You know, if they've been so far traumatized and emotionally put down that they've lost their self-esteem and they just can't even think even for themselves or think that they're worth anything at all. So that's a double impact emotionally on survivors of domestic abuse trauma. We also see the social impacts, again, of being abused. So maybe someone has difficulty gaining or maintaining employment. Maybe they have missed work so many times because their abused person refuses to give them the car keys or won't take them to work. Or maybe they have physical signs of abuse, such as a black eye or something, that they don't want to go to work and have people see that, so they miss work. They're isolated. They have that homelessness. Again, as I mentioned, maybe they don't have anyone to go to or anywhere to go. They've been moved from somewhere and they have no people or social networks close to them that can help them get out of that situation. And so they experience that homelessness as a result. We also see physical manifestations of stress and trauma. So sometimes you might not think that, somebody's emotional abuse of someone or financial abuse of someone would cause physical issues in that person, but it actually can. How often have we heard people say that they have a stress headache? So we have also heard of people having stomach aches all the time, and that can be due to anxiety. A lot of times children will come to you and say, oh, I have a stomach ache, and in the morning, right before school, right? And sometimes they're just faking because they don't want to go to school, but maybe there's actually something going on. They've been bullied, so there's trauma from that. They have a test that they didn't study for, or a paper they didn't write, or they are just nervous about going to school and they have anxiety, and that causes them to have those physical gastrointestinal complaints and some of those other kinds of physical manifestations. And then finally, we see behaviors that are some manifestations that these abused persons might engage in. So maybe if they get out of that relationship that they've been in, they engage in high-risk sexual behaviors. Or we often see people using harmful substances to cope. You know, maybe they use drugs or alcohol to cope with the violence and to get through it, and they become addicted at that point. Or maybe their abusive partner has introduced them to those things and got them addicted onto them. We also see dissociation in some of our survivors, that detachment from reality, memory loss, amnesia, sense of just being outside of yourself and looking down on yourself. And again, the more severe, the stronger the relationship to these negative health and behaviors and different issues. So what are some additional impacts of abuse and trauma on persons with disabilities? Well, we can see additional things for additional impacts as the loss of autonomy or independence. So if they have their only caregiver is their intimate partner and that person's incarcerated, then they might have the loss of a caregiver. If they also, what if they leave their caregiver or their caregiver is incarcerated, then they might lose their home. They might have to be institutionalized if there's no one or no place for them to go. The psychological effects are the same as what we see in anyone who's suffered abuse, and as well as the physical ones, but also they can have an exacerbation of their disabilities based on that abuse that they've had. So maybe they have a certain disability, and because of the certain things that the abusive partner has done to them, that's made them worse. So now we hopefully have a better understanding of the dynamics of domestic abuse, of what it looks like, and now we're going to turn to how you can recognize if someone has suffered abuse. So we want to recognize. That's the second R. We really want to look, listen, and hear what people around us are saying and what they're doing, so that we can identify if someone may be being abused. So how do you find out if someone is in an abusive relationship? Well, there's two ways usually, right? There's disclosures or observations. So the first one, disclosures, they can happen anytime, anywhere, and they can be by an adult victim, they can be by a minor or a family member or friend. So not all disclosures require you reporting to third parties, but some kinds may, and we'll discuss those in a moment, as well as which ones need to be disclosed. So first of all, what do you do when someone tells you that they've been abused or someone's abusing them or they think they're being abused? Well, we always want to make sure that the situation is currently safe for that person and for you as well, and also maybe help them to get safe in the future as well. But we want to make sure that you gather the facts of the situation as best as you can: names of people involved, addresses, contact information, when those things happened. And then you also need to determine whether or not a report has been made to anyone outside of you, or if one needs to be made. So the second way you can find out if someone's being abused is by personally seeing evidence of their abuse or neglect. So that would be your observations. And you want to learn to recognize abuse based on the observations of people around you. So the first one we're going to focus on is the alleged abuser. Sometimes you can see abusive behaviors based on the abuser and not just the abused person. So is that a person that you're around, the abuser? Are they angry, belligerent, or indifferent to their partner's needs? Do they refuse or hesitate to allow their partner to talk to other people? Do they focus on themselves all the time? And do they attempt to control their partner's interactions with other people? And are they extremely jealous or possessive? Those are some signs of a alleged abuser. As well as you can look for, does the alleged abuser not like their partner's friends or family, handle all of their finances and money, become angry or violent when children cry or act out, and always check in with their partner constantly. So we have to recognize that these behaviors, they may not always demonstrate an abusive relationship. So for instance, some partners may agree to one person handling the finances and one doesn't want to have anything to do with it. And that's okay if that's agreed by both people and it's not used to control one of the other partners. You know, sometimes there are legitimate reasons why a partner may not like a partner's friends and family. But we have to look at the totality of the circumstances. But these are some things observed as controlling behaviors of abusers. So not only looking at the alleged abuser, of course, then we want to look at the alleged victim. So does that person seem fearful or anxious when they're around their partner? You know, maybe you encounter that person in other ways, and then only sometimes you see them around their partner, and they act totally different around their partner, as being fearful or anxious or nervous when their partner's near, or when they think their partner might be around. Do they make excuses for that other partner's behavior? Do they not participate in activities that they used to enjoy? Do they act jumpy a lot? Are they constantly looking over their shoulder, and are they exhausted all the time? So those can be cues that someone's being abused, and maybe even, a new abusive relationship compared to if their behaviors change from how they used to be. So we can also see, maybe does that victim, alleged victim, wear long sleeves on warm days, avoid windows or be nervous in those open areas? And do they have those constant complaints of not feeling well? Because remember, the impacts of that psychological abuse and trauma is that physical illness. So, nausea, headaches, body aches, general fatigue, that can be a sign as well, especially if someone hasn't had that before and now they're having it all of a sudden. So there's additional signs of abuse against adults with disabilities that you want to be aware of. So, of course, all of these things that we're talking about depend on the type of disability someone has and what their limitations are, and they differ for different people, right? Because someone with a mobility issue may have different issues compared to someone with a cognitive issue, or someone who is hard of hearing, or someone who is blind. So we want to just be aware and think about each person individually. And some signs of psychological abuse in persons with disabilities include extreme unusual behavior, such as aggressive, submissiveness, or withdrawal. Constantly apologizing, as we saw before, destructive behavior, a lack of contact with their friends or family, and especially if there's a change in that, a decreased ability to cope with familiar situations, high levels of anxiety, especially when they need to go to maybe a certain place, or to be with a certain person, or to see a certain person. And then also sometimes we see that lack of attachment to others. Signs of physical abuse can include unexplained physical injuries, of course, signs of injuries to internal organs, such as vomiting, something like that. Defensive answers when you ask about, well, how'd you get that bruise on your arm? And they don't just say, oh, well, I knocked my arm when I was trying to get the food off of the cabinet or something, but they act defensive about it. And they're like, well, why do you want to know? Or it doesn't matter, or something like that. Being wary of physical contact with people, maybe flinching when somebody comes near you. You have seen that probably sometimes, and even animals do those kinds of things, as well as people who have been abused do those things. Sleep disturbances and new signs of new injuries before old ones have healed. So one injury could happen to anyone in any situation, but if new injuries appear before old ones have healed, and it happens over and over, this could suggest a pattern of abuse. Signs of medication abuse include reduced mental alertness or physical ability, groggy dopiness. That's if someone's been given too much medication, maybe even depression. Or maybe if you're seeing that prescriptions are not being filled, or they're being filled too often. Or maybe you're seeing someone as having an indication that their medication has not been used as directed. So maybe they're not getting enough of it, or maybe they're getting too much, and their behavior or their reactions and things have changed. Signs of sexual abuse, of course, include inappropriate sexual behaviors, or turning into somebody regressing to childlike behaviors or emotional distress, pain in walking or sitting without logical explanations, changes in sexual behaviors, and then, of course, stained or soiled or torn clothing. And finally, signs of neglect we have seen. Some of this that happens to not only persons with disabilities, but also children as well, suddenly being unable to meet essential day-to-day living needs that affect health, safety, or well-being, appearing hungry, malnourished, disoriented, or confused, as if they're not getting enough nourishment, poor hygiene, or wearing the same clothes over and over, the wrong clothes for the weather, shorts in winter, not going to medical or dental appointments and not having those needs met, and frequent unexplained hospitalizations. So now that we know the unfortunate signs to look for when somebody may be abused, now we want to know what domestic abuse, now we want to know, what do we need to do to respond? How can we respond to those people if they either reach out and disclose to us, or if they you see the signs and you think that something might be happening to them. So we always want to believe them first and foremost. When someone tells you that they're being abused, we want to believe them. We want to respect their confidentiality and encourage open communication with them. You know, don't interrogate them. Let them tell you what they're comfortable with telling you. And if you need to report it or someone else needs to know about it, you can always get more information later. We want them to be in a supportive and comfortable environment when you talk to them. And also encourage their personal choice. So adults who are in domestic abusive relationships, they've been controlled, and we want to promote and support them gaining control of their own life and making their own choices and decisions. And sometimes they make choices and decisions that we may not agree with or think are best for them, but we want to support them as best we can in what they think will be best for them in their situation. And of course, offer those resources for them. We need to start by realizing that, you know, this may be the first time that they've ever told anyone that anything happened to them, right? And some people may not be ready to talk about it. They're confused about their relationship and have difficulty trusting people. They also fear their batterer sometimes as well. You know, maybe that's the main reason why people don't talk about it. They can blame themselves as well. And they might respond in ways different than what you expect. So common responses to trauma and violence include aggressiveness. So somebody can just be angry, and somebody could also, a different person could be overly emotional or weepy or sad. Another person may be emotionally numb. You know, you might see that static or flat affect on someone where, you know, they're talking in a monotone and they kind of zone out. And that's a coping mechanism where people dissociate with themselves and with the events. You might often see when someone's trying to tell you the story that there's details missing and that the story doesn't quite make sense because it's often not linear, and it can be a little confusing, but just make sure that the person knows that you're listening. And then if you need to later, you can ask for clarification. We also want to realize, you know, that these different reactions to the abuse are not necessarily a sign of instability or a lack of credibility. You know, it's just how that person is coping with the trauma that they've faced. So what can you say if someone tells you that they've been abused? You know, the most important thing is that, you know, I believe you, you know, I hear you. I'm concerned for you. Many people experience this. You're not alone. You know, it's not your fault. We can help you, or the support is available. So these are just things that you want to say when somebody discloses to you. And remember, getting a disclosure is not the objective of talking to someone. Even if you think that there's abuse happening and they haven't told anyone, you just want to ask questions and offer resources and information and just be supportive of them and let them know that there's someone there who cares and someone who's listening. So that leads us into, when we're responding, does the abuse need to be reported? If someone tells you that something's happening or you suspect something's happening, what needs to happen? Well, of course, if you suspect or someone discloses that there's been some kind of child abuse or neglect, each citizen is a mandated reporter in the state of Indiana, like many states. Any individual who has reason to believe a child is a victim of abuse or neglect must report. So you can just do that, and you can make reports anonymously, of course, as well. And in making a report for child abuse or neglect, of course, you don't want to delay in it. As soon as you suspect something, or you have someone tell you or a child tell you that they're being abused, you need to make a report as soon as possible. And if the child is maybe older, you know, an older child that is able to make a report with you, you know, you can offer to make them one with them if they would like, but don't force them to do that. CPS hotline, there's a 1-800 number as well as website for that. And these resources will be available as well for you. So what if the person who discloses or you suspect of being abused is an endangered adult? Well, first of all, who is an endangered adult, right? We need to know what that is. So an endangered adult is someone at least 18 years of age. And this is Indiana statute. It says they're incapable of managing or directing the management of their own property or providing their self-care. And this can be due to mental illness, intellectual disability, dementia, habitual drunkenness, excessive drug use, or other physical or mental incapacity. And they're harmed or threatened with harm because of either neglect, battery, or exploitation of their services or property. So we'll cover those in a little bit more detail as well. So do you need to report an endangered adult? Yes, just as you have the duty to report an endangered child, you do need to report an endangered adult. Now, if someone is over the age of 18 and they're not considered endangered, they don't have any limitations that would make them endangered, then you do not have to report. But if you're always in doubt, I would say err on the side of caution. And if you think somebody may be an endangered adult, reporting that is okay. And then those people who you report to can make a determination better to determine if that person really is an endangered adult or not. So the definitions of abuse and neglect in Indiana is if somebody abuses somebody, or battery in Indiana is touching someone in a rude, angry, or insolent manner. And then neglecting an endangered adult is that if the person who takes care of them or themselves are unable to provide that adequate food, clothing, shelter, or medical care for that person. So that's what neglect includes. And when we're talking about exploitation of an endangered adult, that's when somebody either uses the personal services or property of someone for their own gain. So some examples of that include sexual misuse of a person, or using their labor without pay, making them work in your house cleaning business and not paying them, or not paying them adequately, and they're an endangered adult. Exerting control over their finances or property. So that includes, taking someone's benefits and things like that. And for making the report of that, of course, just as there's child protective services for abused children, there's adult protective services for abused endangered adults. And so you can call their number or go to their website as well for that. And then what if someone is harmful to their partner? So what if you suspect someone is abusing their partner, or you actually see them abusing their partner? You see someone who you go out to a party with your friends, and one partner grabs the other one and gets in their face and just acts inappropriately with them, or pulls their hair or something. Always consider, is it safe to confront this person or not? If it's not, don't. But if you know this person and you have a relationship with them, talk to them about it. Tell them their behavior isn't okay, and point out which behaviors or actions that they're doing that are abusive. Remind them that they're responsible and accountable for their behavior. And, if they keep it up, they could potentially have law enforcement involved. Ask questions to help them think about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then maybe help them, you want to help them find help if they're willing to getting help. There's a lot there's something called batterers intervention programs, which explains domestic abuse to abusers, about how it affects their partners and their children and things like that. And so there are lots of therapies and ways that people who want to genuinely work on their abuse, to get help with that as well. So finally, after noticing or getting a disclosure of abuse, and then appropriately responding to suspected abuse and reporting if necessary, then of course you should refer survivors of abuse to appropriate services if they are so inclined to use those or not. What can you say? You can let them know that there's an organization that can help them. Turning Point, it has a 24-hour toll-free helpline staffed by people who can help and who care about you and who will listen to you and give you, emotional support. All of our services are free, voluntary, and confidential. And then just give them the information on how to contact us, or tell them, you can contact us with them if they would like to. So if you want to refer to Turning Point Domestic Violence Services, which is in one of these, one of our counties, how can we help? Well, as I said before, we have that 24-hour helpline. So there's an advocate available on the phone 24 hours a day. Anyone can call. and just talk with someone and get referrals or services. We do have the shelter residential services as well as the non-residential services. We have immigrant services, legal services, and then community outreach, prevention, and professional training. So community outreach includes what I'm doing today, speaking to people in our community about domestic violence, what it looks like, and how you can help people. We also have youth engagement, where our prevention team goes into the schools and the community, youth community organizations, and teaches them about healthy relationships and just respect for each other, and, you know, as a way to hopefully prevent abuses in the future. And then we also have professional training, which I give to law enforcement attorneys, and other service providers on just the dynamics of abuse and how to respond in their respective fields to people they may encounter who have those issues, or who may be suffering from domestic abuse, or who have said that they are being abused. People often ask me, well, what happens when you call the helpline? What do they do? Well, they offer emotional support to that person. You know, let them talk, let them tell their story, and just listen, and you know, provide that consideration for them. We give them domestic violence or sexual assault education, as well as safety planning, because we want to make sure that everyone is safe and knows how to be safe and how to get safe. And then also, you know, we can give them referrals internally to our services or to other organizations if they have other needs. So this slide just lists a lot of the residential and non-residential services we have. So anybody who's coming to us can get any combination of any of these things. The biggest ones that, you know, we always make sure that we do with people are the safety planning and education, not only on domestic violence and sexual assault, but also on trauma, on how abuse affects them and the trauma that it causes, what that looks like, how they can cope with it, how they can get services and support for that as well. And finally, what we also talk about when working with domestic violence or sexual assault service providers, confidentiality is our number one thing. Federal law precludes us from divulging any personally identifiable information without a client's written informed consent. So what that means is, if you refer someone to us and then, you know, you call the shelter because you think they're there, or you call an advocate and you want to talk about that person, we cannot confirm or deny that that person's working with us because of their confidentiality and our confidentiality. So like I said, what we'll say is, you know, I'm sorry, I can't confirm or deny that we're working with that individual, but we're happy to pass along a message if they contact us. So you can, if you need to get in contact with somebody, you can give us that information. And if we encounter that person, we will pass that on. And then it's up to that person whether they reach out to you or not. But also, if you are working with someone and they specifically say they want you to reach out to Turning Point, to their advocate, to someone, and talk with them, we have what's called a release of information form, and they can fill that out. They can list your name on it, and they can let us know that we are able to share information with them. So I also have a few resources that I like to share. So these can be available as well. If anyone's interested, they can just reach out to the ARC and they can give you this information, or you can reach out to me and we can give you this information as well. There's a website, End Abuse of People with Disabilities, National Council on Independent Living, Task Force on Violence and Abuse of People with Disabilities, of course, the ADA homepage, and then of our general National Sexual Violence Resource, National Coalition Against Domestic Violence Hotline, and there's also a National Deaf Domestic Violence Hotline. So again, thank you all for tuning in today and giving me your time. Feel free to contact us with any follow-up questions or any concerns or anything. Again, I will have these information available, phone numbers for our helpline, our shelter, and all of our office locations. Thank you very much.